You think you know the answer to what's between the atoms. Empty space. Nothing. Vacuum. You were probably taught that atoms are mostly empty, and that everything solid is an illusion created by forces keeping those atoms apart. It sounds strange, but familiar enough that you stop there. That stopping point is the problem, because nothing is doing a suspicious amount of work in that explanation. When you say there is nothing between atoms, what you really mean is that there is no matter in the everyday sense. No tiny balls. No miniature furniture filling the gaps. But physics does not mean nothing the way you mean nothing. Physics is extremely careful with that word. If there were truly nothing between atoms, nothing would happen there. No forces would act. No signals would pass. No interactions would propagate. Atoms would be isolated islands, unable to notice each other's existence. They aren't. Atoms bind. They repel. They exchange energy. They transmit light. They form molecules, solids, liquids, gases. Entire universes of behavior depend on whatever is between them. So the first illusion to remove is this. Empty space is not empty. It just isn't filled with the kind of things your intuition expects. You were trained to imagine reality as made of objects, with gaps between them. That picture works well at human scale. It fails immediately when you look closely. At the atomic scale, there are no little billiard balls separated by nothing. There are regions where interactions occur, and regions where they don't, governed by rules that do not resemble solidity at all. Between atoms, there are masseurs, fields. Not fields as in fog or fabric or invisible jelly-filling space. Fields as in mathematical structures that assign values to every point in space-time. Electric fields, magnetic fields, quantum fields. They are not things sitting somewhere. They are rules that say what can happen there. This is already uncomfortable because it means the between is not a place you can point to. It is a description of possibility. An electric field does not exist the way a chair exists. You don't find it sitting in the gap between atoms. You infer it because charges behave as if something is constraining them everywhere. The field is real, not because it is made of stuff, but because removing it breaks the predictions. This is the pattern that keeps repeating. Whenever you ask what's really there, physics hands you something that isn't a thing at all. It hands you a lachoa, constraint. Now take this one step further, because this is where the mind break actually happens. In quantum mechanics, even the idea of particles sitting at specific locations between atoms collapses. Electrons are not little dots orbiting nuclei through empty space. They are described by wave functions, probability amplitudes, distributions of possibility. Between atoms, there is not a particle waiting to be found. There's a spread of likelihoods governed by equations that tell you how interactions will unfold. This is why the question, what is the electron doing between measurements, doesn't have the answer you want. It is not doing something definite. It is not traveling through empty space the way a marble travels through air. The universe is not obligated to supply a movie frame for every moment you imagine. Between interactions, what exists is not a thing, but a rule for what could happen next. This is the part most people resist, because it feels like reality is being taken away and replaced with math. That's backwards. The math is what remains after you remove pictures that never matched reality to begin with. Between atoms is not nothing. It is not something. It is structure. Now consider how this scales up. When two atoms bond, they don't touch. There is no moment where hard surfaces meet. What you call contact is a balance of electromagnetic interactions, repulsion from overlapping electron distributions, attraction from shared quantum states. Between the atoms in a solid object is an arrangement of fields and probabilities so stable that your hand cannot pass through it. Solidity is not a property of matter filling space. It is a property of interactions refusing to allow overlap. Your hand feels solid because the space between atoms is enforcing rules. Not because it is filled with stuff. This should already make you uneasy, because it means nothing is doing everything. But it gets worse. Between atoms is also the vacuum. And vacuum, in physics, is not empty. It is the lowest energy state of quantum fields. a seething background of fluctuations. Virtual particles appearing and disappearing, energy that cannot be removed without breaking the theory. You cannot scoop the vacuum out. You cannot turn it off. You cannot expose what's underneath it. The vacuum is not the absence of reality. It is one of its most active configurations. This is why forces can propagate through empty space. This is why light can travel across billions of light years without a medium. This is why atoms can influence each other without touching. Between atoms is the same thing that exists between stars, not emptiness, not substance, but rules that apply everywhere. This is where the everyday picture finally breaks. You were taught that matter is something and space is nothing. Physics shows you that matter is a pattern and space is active. The gap between atoms is not a void waiting to be filled. It is a region governed by laws that do not care whether anything is there for you to see. Once you accept that, the question, what's between the atoms, starts to sound naive. Not because it's stupid, but because it assumes the wrong categories. There is no between the way you imagine. There is no boundary where matter ends and nothing begins. There is a continuous structure where different interactions dominate at different scales. Atoms are not islands in emptiness. They are stable patterns in a field that exists everywhere. And that field is not made of stuff. It is made of permission. If the space between atoms is not empty, the next question comes automatically. What is it actually doing? How can something that isn't a thing push, pull, bind, repel, transmit light, and refuse to let your hand pass through a table? This is where intuition finally runs out of rope. Between atoms, the universe is enforcing rules. Not locally. Everywhere, all at once. An electromagnetic field does not wait for atoms to arrive before it exists. It is already there. When charges appear, they don't create the field so much as reveal how it behaves. The field does not turn on. It constrains. This is why asking, what's in the space, keeps failing. You are looking for contents, where there are only conditions. Now consider how radical that actually is. It means that between atoms, the same structure exists whether or not anything occupies it. The universe does not need matter to activate its rules. The rules are already in place. This is why empty space still has measurable properties. Vacuum energy, zero-point fluctuations, Casimir forces, effects that exist precisely because nothing is not nothing. If you remove all particles from a region, the structure remains, the fields remain, the constraints remain. You have not uncovered a deeper emptiness. You have reached the lowest energy configuration of something that cannot be removed. The vacuum is not the absence of reality. It is reality with nothing happening in it, except what cannot stop happening. This is where people start to get uncomfortable, because it sounds like physics is saying reality is made of ghosts. Invisible things popping in and out of existence. That's another intuition failure. Virtual particles are not little objects briefly appearing and disappearing. They are bookkeeping terms and calculations. They represent allowed interactions within constraints. They are not happening in time the way events happen. They are part of how the structure enforces itself. Between atoms, there is no hidden traffic of tiny objects. There is a mathematical framework that tells interactions how to behave. This is why fields are so hard to picture. They are not substances. They do not sit anywhere. They assign values to possibilities. An electric field tells you what showers happen if a charge were placed there. Not what is there, but what is allowed there. That distinction matters. Between atoms, reality is not occupied. It is conditional. Now think about how this undermines the everyday idea of contact. When you press your hand against a table, you imagine surfaces touching, atoms colliding, matter meeting matter. None of that happens. What happens is this. The electromagnetic fields associated with the atoms in your hand interact with the fields associated with the atoms in the table. Electron probability distributions begin to overlap. The rules governing those distributions forbid further overlap. Repulsion increases. Your hand stops. At no point does anything touch. Solidity is not caused by matter filling space. It is caused by space enforcing rules. Between atoms is the reason you cannot pass through walls. That should feel deeply wrong, because it flips everything you were taught. You thought matter was the actor and space was the stage. Physics says space is the rulebook, and matter is the pattern that plays out within it. Now extend this beyond atoms. Between stars, the same thing exists. Fields, curvature, constraints. Gravity is not a force acting across emptiness. It is space-time geometry telling mass how to move. Light bends not because something grabs it, but because straight paths are not straight in curved space-time. Once again, between is doing the work. The universe is not stitched together by particles bumping into each other. It is held together by a continuous structure that does not care whether anything is present at a given location. This is why you cannot isolate a region of space from the rest of the universe. You can remove matter. You can cool it. You can shield it. You cannot turn off the rules. Between atoms is the same framework that governs galaxies, black holes, and the expansion of the universe. It does not scale down or scale up. It applies. This is the real mind break. The thing you thought was nothing is the most universal aspect of reality. Matter is optional. Fields are not. Interactions are optional. Constraints are not. Between atoms is not emptiness waiting to be filled. It is the presence of the universe's rules, uninterrupted. This is why the search for smaller particles never answered the deeper question. No matter how small, yes, that habit is the last one to die, and it dies hard, because it feels so reasonable. Of course there must be something if you zoom in far enough. Of course the real answer must be hiding in the gaps. Of course explanation must end in a thing you can finally point at. That instinct is not stupid. It is just overtrained. It comes from a world where zooming in really does reveal furniture. Houses break into rooms. Rooms break into objects. Objects break into parts. At no point in daily life does the floor vanish and turn into rules. So you keep expecting physics to behave the same way. But it never does. Every time the zoom gets more powerful, the universe refuses to cooperate. The picture does not sharpen. It dissolves. First the objects go, then the trajectories, then the properties, then even the idea that something is there in the way you mean there. And what replaces all of it is not mystery, it is constraint. That's the part intuition cannot digest. Because constraints don't look like anything. They don't sit anywhere. They don't occupy volume. They don't announce themselves. They just make certain things impossible. The space between atoms does not contain a hidden ingredient, because there is no slot for one. There is no cavity waiting to be filled. There is only a framework that already does everything that needs doing. Forces propagate because the structure allows propagation. Stability exists because the structure forbids collapse. Solidity happens because overlap is disallowed. Light travels because nothing prevents it. Nothing is missing. This is why physics eventually stops asking, what is space made of? Not out of laziness. Out of exhaustion with a question that keeps assuming the wrong grammar. Space is not made of anything. Time is not made of anything. The vacuum is not made of anything. They are not nouns in the way your mind wants them to be. They are conditions, and conditions do not show up when you zoom in. They show up when you try to violate them and fail. That's why the universe feels inverted once you finally let this land. Matter stops feeling primary. Emptiness stops feeling empty. Objects stop feeling fundamental. Rules stop feeling optional. The table doesn't stop your hand. There is no moment where wood and skin meet and negotiate. What stops your hand is that the structure between atoms does not permit the next configuration. No contact, no collision, no touching. Just refusal. And that refusal is everywhere. Between atoms. Between stars. Between thoughts firing in your brain. You don't live on top of space. You don't exist inside a container. You are a pattern allowed by the same constraints that hold the universe together, which is why there is no final reveal waiting in the gaps, no hidden substance, no ultimate filler, no cosmic stuffing. The between is not unfinished. It is not thin. It is not lacking. It is complete. And once you accept that, the original question quietly collapses under its own weight, not because it was foolish, but because it was asking for an answer the universe was never built to give. Atoms are not mostly empty. They are mostly structure doing its job. And that structure does not need your imagination to make it real. It only needs to keep working, which it does, relentlessly. At the very end of this question, there is one habit that still tries to survive. The habit of imagining that if you could somehow zoom in far enough, peel back enough layers, you would finally see what's really there. The true contents of space. The final answer, hiding between atoms. That habit is the last illusion, because there is no final zoom level, where the between turns into a thing. Every time physics has zoomed in, the same pattern has repeated. Objects dissolve into interactions. Interactions dissolve into fields. Fields dissolve into constraints. And constraints to connotate occupy space. They define it. The space between atoms does not contain reality. It is the framework reality operates within. That is the reversal that makes this question feel so destabilizing. You were taught that emptiness is absence. Physics shows you that emptiness is the default state of a system governed by rules. It is what remains when nothing is happening, except what cannot stop happening. That is why vacuum is not quiet. That is why it has energy. That is why it fluctuates. That is why forces propagate through it. That is why light crosses it without resistance. If the space between atoms were truly nothing, the universe would fall apart instantly. No forces could act. No structures could form. No information could travel. The fact that anything holds together at all tells you that the between is doing everything. This is why the phrase, atoms are mostly empty space, is so misleading. It suggests emptiness is a lack. In reality, it is a presence without substance. A presence of structure. Between atoms is not where matter stops. It is where the rules never stop. And now comes the quiet conclusion that most people never articulate. If the same structure exists everywhere, whether matter is present or not, then matter is not the foundation of reality. It is a guest. A recurring pattern, a temporary configuration, a stable disturbance in something far more permanent. That something is not a material. It is not a medium. It is not a hidden ether. It is the set of constraints that never go away. You cannot scrape them off. You cannot dig beneath them. You cannot remove them without removing reality itself. This is why physics stops asking what space is made of and starts asking how it behaves. There is nothing underneath behavior. The between is not waiting to be filled. It is what everything else depends on to exist at all. Once you see this, the world starts to feel strangely inverted. Solids feel less solid. Emptiness feels less empty. Objects feel less fundamental. Relationships feel unavoidable. That inversion is not confusion. It is accuracy. Your hand does not feel solid because it is full of matter. It feels solid because the space between atoms enforces constraints that refuse overlap. The table is not stopping your hand. The structure between them is. The universe is not stitched together by matter touching matter. It is held together by rules that never let go. That is why this answer breaks minds. It doesn't give you something new to imagine. It takes away the last place imagination was hiding. There is no tiny furniture in the gaps. There's no hidden substance filling space. There's no deeper layer waiting to be revealed. Between atoms is the same thing that exists everywhere else, not nothing. Structure. And that structure is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not glow or shimmer or move. It simply constrains relentlessly, everywhere, all the time. You live inside it. You think inside it. Your questions arise inside it. And between the atoms that make up those thoughts is the same empty space that refuses to be empty. That is the real answer. Not that atoms are mostly empty, but that emptiness is where the universe keeps all its power.